Welcome back. So this is the Maruyama brand new MP9 submachine gun. You guys know that.
Well, I was thinking about getting a SCW9, but now I might be more interested in this.
Leave this a set.
So who is hyped the F? Me. Real.
It's not guaranteed that it will be good, but given Maruyama's track record, it seems likely. There's a new contender in town, one that will actually be efficient. Talk whatever you want, have an NPS.
When I've seen this one, this is a classic.
What do you mean you've seen this? It's brand new.
CNC trigger, manual, charging handle. Unfortunately, just had an issue, something seized up, and can't fix.
So the Maruyama MP9 may be a rug pull. How does the nozzle return spring look like?
We're talking about a sample size of 1. We shouldn't jump to conclusions. Yeah, I'm canceling my order.
Wondering if I should cancel my pre-order. Might just cancel my order TBH.
Lo and behold, the PCG jumped off the guide rails.
Maruyama MP9 is certified trash.
So, it's shit?
I'm going to ask Probst to switch my order.
Okay, it's functional again. Now I am really curious as to if it's an assembly issue.
I think if we post about it more, we'll figure it out from pure theory.
Wait, was that sarcasm?
It's fucking over.
I had high hopes for this.
I think it's entirely fair to look at what's happened so far and
Looks like it's not very good.
thus the Yama hype train is finally hitting the brakes. Sad.
Me right now.
Is it? Got him.
Oh my god, I won this!
How's it looking? Oh! He's hit. I'm gonna go low. That's game!
Well, that was certainly a roller coaster, wasn't it? The Maruyama MP9 is quite possibly the most hotly anticipated airsoft gun of 2025, but let's all take this as a reminder neither to get unreasonably hyped up nor to assume the worst on the basis of limited information. The real MP9 originated with the Steyr TMP, a machine pistol designed in the late 1980s and which saw only limited use in the 90s. In 2001, Steyr sold the rights to B&T, who promptly began iterating on the design as the B&T MP9. It's a polymer body closed bolt machine pistol with a funky fire control design and an even funkier rotating barrel delayed blowback system. It's one of those guns that is never sold in massive quantities but sees sporadic use by various militaries and civilian agencies because few other guns do what it does. When it comes to airsoft, the continued popularity of the KWA MP9 despite its long-standing issues points to the intrinsic appeal of the design, and so today we're exploring the Maruyama rendition. And I get it now. This isn't much bigger than a pistol, and fully loaded with a T2 style red dot, it's a mere 3.3 pounds or 1.5 kilograms. In part, that's due to the mostly plastic construction of the gun, but let's talk specifics. Starting at the muzzle, this is not actually the barrel, but rather a steel sleeve incorporated into the internal locking block. On the real gun, this indexes the rotating barrel, serves as a simple blast deflector, and has lugs for a tri-lug suppressor. Above it is the primary takedown lever, which is steel, and secures the bolt and barrel assembly to the lower receiver. Behind, on the plastic receivers, there's a removable plastic rail on the right side, and on the left side the marking MP9. This is the only marking on the gun gun, no serial number, no B&T logo. On top, there's a simple steel front sight post, which adjusts for elevation via a screw on the inside of the gun, so not something you would do in the field. The rear sight is a plastic ghost ring assembly that more easily adjusts for windage with a screw on the side, and is protected by 2 small wings. All the plastic on this gun is nylon, so there's a little bit of flex to it, but it's strong, looks good, and is resistant to common solvents. Now you probably won't use the irons much anyway, since this gun is designed around the use of optics on this full-length Picatinny rail. However, if you want to be able to adjust the hop up without disassembly, it's necessary not to obstruct the small hole for the TDC style adjustment system. A micro dot mounted just ahead of the ejection port, as is typically seen, will just barely leave enough room to get a 1.5mm Allen key in there. The ejection port shows the bolt, which is aluminum. As usual, the matte white finish of clear anodized aluminum doesn't quite match the shinier silver of a steel bolt. As usual, I'm probably the only dork who notices or cares. On the lower receiver, note that this is one big block of plastic incorporating the stock hinge, pistol grip, and foregrip. If you've ever seen an MP9 with a removable foregrip, be aware that that is specific to US civilian market semi-auto TP9s to avoid NFA prohibitions on foregrips on pistols, and aside from a short-lived production run with Picatinny rails, actual MP9s have fixed foregrips. Right above the foregrip is the second takedown lever, which is steel. The primary controls consist of a steel bolt release on the left side, a rotating selector on both sides with a short throw for semi and a much longer one for auto, and a mag release that slides if pushed from the left and pivots if pushed from the right. The charging handle is an AR-style low-profile pinch handle at the rear, so with the exception of the bolt release, all the controls here are mirrored, and this gun works equally well for right-handed and left-handed shooters. The trigger is plastic and incorporates a Glock-style trigger safety. Lastly, while the stock looks flimsy and does bend if pulled in tight against the shoulder, I can caveman it pretty good without it snapping, so we're not really worried about this for outdoor use. It has no wobble whatsoever, and by pressing a release button on the underside, I can fold it over where it hooks into the takedown lever slot above the front grip. It snaps into place, where it essentially becomes an extension of the foregrip, but deploys by just pulling on it and locks into place nicely. The magazine ought to look familiar if you have a Maruyama APC9, because it's the exact same magazine. This is a translucent plastic shell over an aluminum reservoir, and it's quite light at under 250 grams empty. Personally, I think the fake bullet stickers look cheesy, but they're mostly hidden when in use, and I guess from a distance they look more convincing. Whatever. In any case, the front of the mag is unstickered, and this makes the BB track visible without exposing it to possible dirt intrusion, which is cool. The mag also has a nylon base plate, which enables it to survive being dropped on the ground if you aren't some sort of coward. Yeah, we're calling you out for taking care of expensive equipment. I don't remember where I was going with this. Lastly, Maruyama made the interesting decision to include a short B&T style suppressor with the gun as part of the base package. This is mostly aluminum with a steel ratcheting mechanism, and it mounts to the gun by sliding it on at an angle, rotating vertical, and then tightening the can itself against the tri-lug mount. This secures it pretty well and there's no wobble, but it is still capable of twisting slightly, so it'd be best to use the integral rail for a light and then put a laser or other device that requires maintaining 0 on the receiver instead. If we unscrew the front section of the suppressor, we find 2 interesting things. First, this is a spacious can, and it's trivial to 3D print a sleeve to fit any sort of tracer unit. Second, check this out. There's 14mm airsoft threading, so if you have a more compact tracer suppressor, you can simply channel your inner exhibit. Yo dog, I heard you like suppressors, so you put a can in your cans you can suppress while you My bones are crumbling to dust. In any case, the aluminum construction means this suppressor comes in at just 300 grams. So, I like these externals. It's mostly plastic, but it's good plastic. The rail thing is plastic too. And as far as we can tell, aside from the bolt, everything is steel it ought to be. The combination of mostly plastic construction, lightweight magazines, and aluminum bolt explains the gun's lightweight before even opening it up, and the controls and handling generally feel modern, though we'll talk about that more later. Field stripping is not intuitive, but it's really not as hard as it's made out to be. The issue is just that there's a specific order to it, and out of the box these parts are tight enough that it can be hard to tell if you're doing something wrong or just need to apply more force. So first, pull down the takedown lever above the foregrip, and while holding it down, rack and release the charging handle. This will pop the barrel forwards, and you'll be able to tell both because the takedown lever will stay down, and because this darker tab on the bolt is now entirely in front of the frame rail. Next, push in the recoil spring guide and lift the rear of the upper receiver just a bit so it stays unlocked. And lastly, here's the funny bit. Put your thumb under the muzzle and pull back on the front takedown tab. Push up on the muzzle hard with your thumb, and it comes apart. While we're here, I'll demonstrate reassembly. Slide the upper assembly onto the lower until it stops, then push in the tab to permit the front of the upper to travel the rest of the way. Push in the recoil spring guide to seat the rear of the upper, and make sure the upper doesn't get caught in the middle over this hump on the lower. Lastly, reach into the muzzle and push the barrel all the way back, and then assist the final takedown latch back into position if it doesn't pop up on its own. This all sounds excessively complicated, but once you know what to do, it's very easy. So with the gun apart, we have one major caveat to explain. This gun has been converted from its default short stroke to full stroke. This does require permanent modification of the gun, but it does not prevent it from being returned to short stroke, and will note the areas that have been modified. We would also like to thank the Heavy Recoil Club user Bena Nami for determining exactly what alteration is necessary for full stroke, so big thanks to him for doing the legwork on this. Starting in the upper, pulling back on the bolt and barrel assembly frees it to come out the bottom. Remaining in the upper is the first short stroke modification, which is chopping about 7mm off the end of the plastic recoil spring guide. We then bevel the end just to ensure it properly telescopes into the bolt, which can be done with a hand file. Now the bolt and barrel assembly looks so wacky because it's cosmetically replicating the rotating barrel arrangement of the real gun. The first step here is to separate the bolt from the barrel, which normally requires just prying off a plastic clip. That clip serves as a spacer between the barrel and the bolt catch assembly, but it gets in the way of the bolt in full travel, so we've omitted it, but so far haven't noticed any functional concerns as a result. With it removed, the bolt can slide off the back, and we'll return to that. The barrel is locked into this locking block by a cam pin on top, which in turn is retained by the takedown tab. It actually replicates the barrel movement and rotation of the real gun when separated like this, but when reassembled, the barrel is prevented from traveling far enough to rotate by the indexing lugs in the lower, and then held rigidly in place by the takedown catch, which plugs into a circular slot on the underside of the barrel. We don't need to take any of this apart, just separate the hop unit, which requires pushing out a single cross pin. With the hop unit removed, we can now open it up with a single screw. So this is very easy to access the hop on, and you may want to do that as swapping out the solid cylindrical nub for a contoured nub, in this case a quad nub, noticeably improved the consistency with 32s. You can also see how tension is applied via a pivoting arm, which receives pressure from a grub screw onto the top, and that's what the hex key was slotting into earlier. Note that the bolt carrier actually has a hole on it to allow that external adjustment, so if the slot on the exterior of the gun is obstructed, then the hop can still be adjusted by removing the bolt carrier assembly from the upper. The stock barrel is 123mm, but can go up to around 265mm with the suppressor to cover it. The bolt carrier weighs about 200 grams assembled, and as you can see is composed of both a main aluminum body and a steel insert. So most of it is aluminum for low weight, and then it has steel for the portion that contacts the fire control group and rearmost portion of the rails. One thing we noticed we do not like, however, is that by default there is a little bit of play between these two pieces, which permits the aluminum portion of the bolt to tilt up very slightly and start wearing oddly on the rails where they meet the steel section. That hasn't caused any problems yet, and it is fixable, I just don't like it. The reason this is possible is because the steel section is secured by just one big screw at the back, so let's take that out. With it removed, the steel falls out the bottom along with the nozzle, but it's still secured to its return spring and the rest of the bolt. This is attached to the bolt by a thin roll pin, which we could knock out, but I find easier to just gently unscrew it from the nozzle. With the nozzle free, we can examine it, and this is in fact a VFC Glock 18C nozzle and piston. These were bone dry out of the box, so we do recommend smearing a light layer of grease on the inside of the nozzle to help it travel smoothly. The only other part to look at here is the rocket valve, which comes out by knocking out the cross pin in the nozzle. This is a standard pistol design, and while it is as always easy to reduce the power by gluing in tubing, which we have a free public tutorial for on our Patreon, there is no straightforward way to implement an externally adjustable valve. Hopefully Aftermarket will provide a solution, as that is something we consider extremely helpful for any GBB. On reassembly, hook the front of the steel insert into the aluminum bolt before sliding up the rear, and then hold the parts tightly together while tightening the screw to ensure they stay aligned. Additionally, note that the bolt catch surface is peening slightly, but it is reinforced with the steel inserts. We expect this to stabilize. And I also want to point out this odd cut at the front. We made this alteration as a necessary part of full travel conversion. It's clearance so the bolt doesn't impact a screw hole in the lower. Let's show the lower now. The trigger is a simple linearly sliding piece with a steel transfer bar that interacts with the fire control group at the rear. It's held down by the bolt catch assembly, which normally is secured to the lower by a plastic piece that slots into the front and screws down. Again, for full travel, this has been altered by omitting the plastic piece, so it's actually the upper receiver that holds the bolt catch assembly, and with the upper removed, it comes right out. This is the screw hole I mentioned, necessitating alteration to the carrier to avoid hitting it. The takedown mechanism in the front is pretty straightforward, and note that if this securing bracket should come loose, it is attached to the lower by a screw inside the front grip. Moving right onto the back is our fire control group, and this looks nothing like the fire control on a real MP9. Real MP9 FCG is a holdover from the original Steyr design, and it is weird. Maruyama instead took the interesting choice of essentially using a VFC G18C fire control group. I say essentially because the housing is a little different, so we're not actually certain whether any of these parts will interchange with VFC Glock parts, and thus we're hedging our bets with weasel words. If you've ever seen a Select Fire GBB Glock fire control unit though, this should look very familiar. To remove it, first we need to pry out 2 E-clips securing this cross pin, which is a little tricky. Removing the pin frees the transfer bar, and now the trigger can come out. Now I just have to take out this big screw at the back, and rotate up and remove the steel rail insert. That frees a faux pin on either side, and pushing those out frees a fire control group to come up. Throughout this process, be careful not to lose the transfer bar, reset plunger, and spring. And here we are, the fire control group. While the housing is some flavor of alloy, all the parts in it are steel, and so far wear appears to have stabilized after the first 1,000 rounds or so. That's a big upgrade over the old Marui or VFC G18s, would inevitably break something here, but there has been some documented breakage of the spring acting on this hammer roller, which if it happens causes the bolt to get stuck on the fire control group and requires some finagling to resolve. We haven't experienced this ourselves, but it is a concern, and in theory the equivalent spring for a Glock ought to work, or it may be possible to swap out the entire bearing for a roller and eliminate the need for a spring entirely. Okay, major interjection late in editing. It looks like the valve knocker lock, and trigger sear are unique to this gun, but the hammer, rotor spring, and auto sear should be compatible with VFC G18C parts. That's important because while most of the wear seems to have stabilized, the hammer rotor has continued to slowly degrade. Over time, this results in the bolt not pushing the hammer down quite as far, which after about 6,000 rounds in testing has created a serious malfunction. Right now, when the gun is set to full auto, as power drops in the magazine from cooldown, it can reach a point where it doesn't quite have enough energy to slam the hammer past the auto sear. That allows the hammer to pop back up immediately underneath the bolt, which completely locks it up. We expect this is only going to get worse with use, and as wear progresses it will start to manifest in semi-auto as well, rendering the gun unusable. So replacing this rotor will be outright mandatory for long-term use, but replacements are readily available. This doesn't substantially change our opinion of the gun, just keep it in mind as we continue with the rest of the review, which was recorded right before this problem started to appear. Lastly, note one minor alteration for full travel, which is just filing a slight angle on the back of the screw slot. We're not sure how necessary this is, but it ensures the nozzle cannot catch on the fire control during cycling. Moving over to the rail insert, this is the final piece for full travel conversion. Originally, there was a 2-piece buffer with a plastic puck and a rubber rod secured by a roll pin. Removing those permits the bolt to travel far enough to hit the backplate. Note that the rubber rod can be removed to somewhat increase travel without making any other alterations to the gun, but when we tried that, we discovered that the timing was just right to allow the bolt catch to bounce up and arrest the bolt during cycling. So either leave it all alone or do the full set of modifications for full travel, nothing in between. To summarize, full travel conversion requires shortening the recoil spring guide, leaving off the outer barrel spacer, leaving off the plastic securing block for the bolt catch, filing a relief cut on the bolt, filing a very small angle onto the trigger housing, and removing the buffer from the stock. This is a substantial alteration, and while we have tested extensively, we cannot yet be certain if there are any long-term consequences we've missed, so replicate this at your own risk. And for the sake of completeness, in stock configuration, the gun has about 1 2/3 inches or 4.2 centimeters of travel, which is more than an AAP-01, but less than most other pistols. With the full travel modifications, it reaches 2 1/4 inches or 5.7 centimeters. Not a huge difference in distance, but it does make quite a difference in feeling during live fire. And lastly, be sure to lubricate the bolt guide's lugs at the front, the corresponding lugs on the barrel, the rails on the bolt, the rail insert, and the surfaces of the fire control group that contact the carrier. All the guns we've seen so far have shipped bone dry, and as always a bit of lubrication will help with efficiency and reducing wear. On to the magazine, which as mentioned before is reused from other Maruyama guns. This mag holds up to 47 BBs and a total capacity of 22 grams of gas, with the caveats that it will not seat in the gun if completely filled with BBs, and is intended to hold much less gas than that. Let's explore further, and start by removing 2 screws to free the base plate and feed track. Easy enough, and now there's a large plug containing the fill valve. With the plug removed, we see that yes, this gun actually uses a limiter tube to limit the capacity to about half. At the top of the magazine, pushing out 2 cross pins frees the feed lips and gas router, and allows the inner reservoir to now slide out of the shell. This gun uses a standard VFC Glock output valve, which if I punch out 2 more pins, I can twist the head off the reservoir. So this is the layout, a simple tube with a cap at the top and bottom, each sealed by a single circular O-ring. So far we haven't experienced any leaks, and while we've praised fitted gaskets in the past, using a circular O-ring to seal a circular reservoir is perfectly reasonable, and these are a very tight fit. It's a simple magazine, it's just the details of use that have some nuance. First, while it's very easy to strip BBs out of the feed lips, it's much more difficult to load in the first place. The gun comes with a regular pistol speed loader and adapter which work okay, but we highly recommend getting a Comrade Quiche speed loader adapter, and also note that loading will get easier as the mag breaks in. If you load to capacity, just be sure to strip out the last BB before use. Now as for gas, filling at room temperature will go to 12 grams or so and then stop. If chilled, it can fill past that but will start siphoning on auto and can go to about 20 grams before it starts siphoning on rapid semi. Straightforward enough, but also note that because this mag has a plastic shell, the reservoir itself has low thermal mass and it doesn't conduct particularly quickly, so it will need time to warm up after filling or between reloads of BBs. That's the MP9, and while it would be overly reductive to describe it as essentially a VFC G18C in a fancy shell, the nozzle and fire control designs do impact a lot of the shooting characteristics of the gun, and so it should not be surprising to hear that in terms of performance, this is more akin to a large pistol than to a small submachine gun. I'm getting ahead of myself though, so let's review controls and operation. Magazine insertion is smooth, and then the charging handle is pretty easy to grasp. Unlike on the real thing, there is no locking mechanism here, just the bolt keeping it forwards, so in theory it could be possible for the charging handle to bounce back and hit the shooter during cycling, but so far the little bit of friction between the receiver and the handle seems to prevent that. Once loaded, the safety manipulation is simple and intuitive, though I often find I brush the bolt release when trying to grab the safety with my thumb. Well, it's a short throw between safe and semi as mentioned before, or a much longer one for auto requiring a deliberate motion. The trigger is a long but light take-up before a reasonably crisp break at 5.5 pounds, a noticeable bit of over-travel, and then a reset just before the break. This isn't a bad trigger, and it has improved with use, but it's heavier than most airsofters are likely accustomed to, and that makes it a bit tougher to spam. When empty it locks open, the mag release is easy to hit. After inserting a new mag, I find even with my big hands I have to break my grip to reach the bolt release, but it's a good size and shape that's easy to press and keep on shooting. And lastly, hop adjustment requires a hex key, but is pretty easy to do after fiddling a bit to get the key in. For shooting, we'll start with the default short stroke. This is incredibly snappy, but it's little bolt mass moving a short distance. Switching to full travel, while the recoil isn't particularly strong, I do at least now feel like it's doing something, and it's still cycling quickly compared to most rifles. However, cooldown does become more noticeable from room temperature because it doesn't take long for it to reach the point where the bolt no longer slams into the back of the receiver. Testing efficiency, on 12 grams of propane and continuous semi-auto at room temperature, a little over 100 shots before it starts failing to fully cycle. In strings of 45 with time to warm up, we get just barely 3 mags. That's pretty solid, and can actually be nearly doubled by filling to 20 grams, but full auto is where the need for that fill limiter becomes apparent. When filled beyond 12 grams, the gun siphons heavily, spewing liquid propane and struggling to clear a single mag without massive slowdown and loss of power, even when fired in bursts. So the solution is to just fill at room temperature without chilling the mag, and this reliably fills to the 12 grams allowed by the fill limiter. With the lesser thermal mass, it still experiences cooldown but doesn't siphon, and on full auto will reliably clear 1 mag at room temp, though not 2. We suspect that part of the reason why Maruyama implemented short stroke to begin with is because the lesser travel helps conceal cooldown. It still slows down as it gets colder, but it never hits a point where you can tell the bolt is stopping short, as is the case with full travel. In any case, if you want to use full travel for the sake of realism, you can of course load to a realistic 30 rounds, and then it clears out with no problem. Lastly, with the magazine chilled to freezing, the gun doesn't work at all. On propane, it won't cycle far enough to reliably pick up a BB anywhere below 40 Fahrenheit or 4 Celsius. This gun is very sensitive to temperature, and we advise the use of stronger gas than propane below 50 Fahrenheit or 10 Celsius if possible. Remember what I said about this being kind of like a VFC G18C in a fancy shell? The mild recoil, high cyclic rate, and inability to work in cold weather are all we would expect from a select fire pistol and a carbine kit. While this isn't actually a pistol and a carbine kit, the reuse of Glock designed for the fire control and nozzle, does produce pistol-like performance characteristics. Onto chronoing, and with a 12 gram fill, we see the cooldown over the course of a mag from about 1.3 joules to just under a joule with 0.32 gram BBs. That's pretty good considering this isn't a lot of gas and it's being used to shoot 45 BBs, and filling to 20 grams will significantly reduce cooldown. Installing a longer inner barrel covered by the suppressor will work for higher power, or shimming the rocket valve will reduce power, as we cover in our Patreon post. On that note, if you like our work, consider checking out our Patreon, linked in the description, where we have free public articles in addition to some perks for our patrons. And if there's nothing there that interests you, just let us know what you'd like to see. For range testing, I mentioned before that we swapped the nub for a quad contoured one. After giving it some time to break in, this results in the same good accuracy we see from the VFC FNC and AK. If it wasn't clear already, despite some caveats, this all comes together into an exceptionally practical gas blowback machine pistol. Compared to something like an 11.5 AR, it is tiny, and it's small and light even compared to other PDWs like the MP7. Folded up, it's similar to a large pistol in size, and not actually terrible to shoot like a pistol, and Maruyama actually makes shorter mags as well, though we foolishly forgot to order some. The one thing that may be a little surprising is that the length of pull is very long, comparable to a fully extended M4 stock, but because so little the gun protrudes ahead of the pistol grip, this really isn't an issue. Because the gun is so small, I don't particularly care for the kitted up feel with EOTech and laser and all the gadgets. I mean, it's fine, it works, I don't think it plays to the gun's strengths. The humble T2 style red dot, on the other hand, is not only an ergonomically excellent choice, it's the appropriate sight for the gun. That's because the original T1 was actually designed by Aimpoint at B&T's request specifically as a compact sight for the MP9. It has negligible weight or bulk, and even direct mounted like this, the height relative to the stock is comparable to a lower third co-witness mount for an AR. If you prefer taller than that, just slap on a riser and good to go. Throw in how light the mags are and their high BB capacity, and you get a gun that you can easily stow in a backpack with a couple of mags as a backup, or use the minimalist rig as a lightweight primary. This is just an exceptionally usable gun. Sure, if you compare it to a modern gas rifle, then the light recoil, no adjustable valve, and non-existent cold weather capability are kinda lame. But if you compare it to a FMG, Flux Raider, AAP carbine, or B&T USW, in other words pistol-based PDWs, what you have here is a gun that shares a lot of the same limitations, but otherwise performs great, and more importantly, avoids the ergonomic weirdness you get with a stocked pistol or carbine kit. And compared to the old KWA MP9, which we have some experience with, the fact that the Maruyama doesn't use a proprietary hop or fragile cup seal, doesn't have self-destructing nozzle return springs, and doesn't require a whole suite of aftermarket parts just to correct these deficiencies, well, that's worth the price of admission. There is aftermarket for the Maruyama already, with Maruyama releasing a suite of CNC aluminum parts alongside the gun, but we didn't pick any of them up, and frankly, I don't think any are necessary. What would be nice to see would be an adjustable power solution, and the gun is also pretty oversprung as it stands, so weaker recoil hammer and auto sear springs ought to tone down the cyclic rate a bit while improving recoil efficiency and cold weather performance. So to summarize, what we have here is a compact, lightweight machine pistol that is robustly built despite being mostly plastic externals, with steel where it matters. Internally, it's a full steel fire control group, plus steel insert for an aluminum carrier, reducing the wear and tear often seen on airsoft Glocks sharing the same basic nozzle and fire control design. It does not accept any off-the-shelf adjustable rocket valve, and the stock hop isn't ideal, but that at least can be significantly improved with just a new nub and in under 5 minutes. It has great ergonomics, snappy cycle, and solid efficiency, though little recoil, and it chokes and dies long before it reaches freezing. Despite this gun's limitations, I'm surprised at how much I like it. It has a specific role, and it fulfills it well. But then there's that lingering issue of the hammer rotor eroding, something that will need to be addressed sooner or later. While VFC G18C hammer rotors and springs ought to work, it's an obnoxious part to swap, and that really detracts from the otherwise good build quality of the gun. You'll have to decide for yourself whether you're willing to deal with that inevitability. Getting into pricing, at under $300 for the gun plus suppressor and $30 a pop for magazines, this is an exceptionally affordable GBBR. I mean, for our American peers, it's still subject to the same dartboard tariff nuttiness as everything else, but there's not much we can do about that. I'm sure there are going to be people outrageously disappointed that this is merely good, with caveats, and not the best thing since that VFC AK I just can't shut up about. But it is good, it's reasonably priced, and most of all, there currently aren't any better options in this form factor. What I'm now very curious about is how it compares to the upcoming Raptor SR2M, and I'm sure we'll be tackling that one sooner or later. For now, we hope you enjoy this video, and thanks for watching.